Hey everyone, it's Ryan Flynn. I am here with Walter, and we're going to talk about what's trending in AI today. So, we both track AI in healthcare across science, across pharma, across biotech, and we both actively publish regular newsletters and content online. So, we thought it'd be great to get together and actually talk about what are the top three things we've seen so far for the first half of the year and where we think will be going next. So, Walter, you want to give a quick introduction?
Well, sure. Thanks, Ryan, for the invite. And I'm Walter Robinson. I'm based in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And I know you're in California. And I just want to let you know that this is a tariff-free zone. There are no trade disputes. We are freely exchanging stuff about AI and healthcare. And I've got about 30 years in and out of pharma and in the quarters and around the quarters of power in Ottawa, done stuff in the States as well in pharma. And I'm coming at it, Ryan, I think like you. I'm not a doctor. I only play one at my family Christmas table,
Right.
diagnose or say you need this prescription. And I'm not an AI expert. What I think I am an expert is on curiosity and what patients want to see. I've done 30 years of patient advocacy and public policy development in and around life sciences. And my vision is to kind of, what we're trying to do, I think we're both trying to do, is share this knowledge and get people excited about the technology and how it can improve their lives and longevity and how they can be better partners and advocates in their own healthcare.
Yeah, I started my newsletter AIRX a year ago because I kept seeing these posts about new developments, new tools, new technologies, and I just couldn't keep up with it. So I started this weekly newsletter to force myself to learn new things, and it still is, I still feel behind, but I have about 25 years of experience both in journalism and communications. I've worked at Bloomberg News, and I've worked at J&J as a comms leader, and I've led comms for a couple of agencies, a couple of companies. So, now I'm an independent consultant and also just trying to stay ahead of this rush of news, both reporting for different outlets and also for helping companies in the space tell their story. So I think you and I have a really similar background in a way that, are both the key thing for both of us is what is the narrative, what the story, and how can we explain these complex topics in plain language so the average person can understand and not get lost in sort of the technical language because I'm not a scientist either. I come at it
Yeah.
from what's a good story and how can I explain to the average person.
Well, it's like Warren Buffett once said he doesn't buy stuff that he doesn't understand what the company does or can't pronounce the name. And I think that's important for trust that you and I not only have as writers and advocates for this sector, but being parents and caregivers and patients, consumers and patients from time to time. You want to trust your physicians, you want to trust your healthcare team, you want to trust the technology. The good news is that I don't think it has to be that complicated. And I always think about the phone. We've been training AI on our phone for 15 years. We interact with it every day, probably 50, 200 times a day as we hit the screen. So if we come to that thing that you have control of it, and then let's just kind of bring it into the healthcare domain, I think it is really empowering. But let's dive into some of these subjects. I mean, it's been a crazy 6, 7 months.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. Before we dive in, I saw a tweet this morning that I wanted to share, and it was from Adam Singer talking about how, there's sort of like two perspectives on AI right now. And one is like, oh, it's like this magic fairy dust where it's everything's amazing. It's going to change the world. And if you're not a billionaire already, you're already lost out. And the other perspective is it's just junk. It's basically it's a passing fad. It's going to be gone within 6 months. And obviously the truth is in between those two. And hopefully we can have people walk away from this conversation with a better sense of what's really going on. So yeah, why don't you kick things off with the maybe your top three, and then we can go into the first one.
Well, I think my first one is I predicted in my own newsletter, on my X feed, and stuff that I put on LinkedIn every day was radiology seems to be at the forefront of AI and AI introduction because ironically, images have been easier to kind of take pictures of, scan millions and millions and millions, and all the imaging professions. And I knew it was going to be big at the beginning of the year because we've had a decade of this, but we're now in the place in the radiology community specifically where it's almost people are starting to say if you're not using AI in image selection, image generation, helping you come to a diagnosis, you may be guilty of malpractice by not doing so. And there have been debates in the leading radiology magazines. Where is our profession going? What will it be? Will it be in existence? Will it combine with something else? Similar in cardiology, similar in ultrasound. And just as a fact, the US FDA has now the gold standard for medtech approval, has now approved 1,250 plus devices that have software and AI embedded in them as a knowledge generation tool and accumulating more knowledge. And radiology is the number one leader by far. And just behind that is cardiology. So that's what I found really interesting in the last 6 months, just the growth of this debate. People were joking when Jeffrey Hinton, one of the modern godfathers, said at a creative destruction lab event almost a decade ago, well, don't become a radiologist.
Right.
They'll be redundant, along with the memes about self-driving cars and we'd all be billionaires. None of that's happened, but it is a discussion that's creeping in around no longer what I call point innovation, where it's just an algorithm or an embedded piece of software in a scanning tool. What we're seeing now is AI in the imaging professions, not only fitting in with what's called the clinical workflow, but changing it, cutting out steps, making a technologist more valuable in terms of actually interpreting, running the segmentation, and then having certain images and certain software and AI tools as a collaborative and cognitive aid to a radiologist in kind of coming. You may have missed this. Did you think about that? And then where the physician or the radiologist, the healthcare professional themselves, can come and say, yes, the images tell me all of this, and this, but I also look at the patient's chart and I see the history of this, and I see surgical interventions before. And that dialogue, and it is a bit of a conflict. I mean, every good discussion should have a conflict and come to a consensus. That's really powerful. And I think changing that profession for the better.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of fascinating stories on this topic this past 6 months, and I've covered this a couple of these in my newsletter. One that I sort of find fascinating is using images from one particular section of healthcare for a different use. So in particular, there's studies showing that mammogram images can actually help detect heart conditions that might be missed or you might not have gone to
Yeah.
a cardiologist for, right? You go every couple of years versus the mammograms every year. So that is sort of a fascinating, like multimodal approach to taking existing content and using it for other purposes. And I wonder, what's the ultimate outcome for that? And then the other one I think is sort of interesting, more broadly, access to care is hard in a lot of areas. And in some places with, more socialized medicine, it's hard to get radiology for, say, something that's not urgent. And so you could see a situation where,
I've lived that world, by the way.
well, yeah,
Here in Canada, I've lived that world. Keep going. Sorry.
yeah, we just go bankrupt here in the U.S. when we can't afford it. So it's a little bit, it's a, tit for tat. But, you see a situation where there could be potentially consumer devices that you have an issue. You can scan it at home, not obviously like X-ray, but there are some potential ways that you could see more like maybe drive-through services where there's no maybe human doing it. They're just their technician taking the image, but then it gets sent off to AI first, and then you get a follow up. So I'm not sure where that will lead to, but it could, like you said, change what the workforce is doing. Do they take the first pass or the second pass after AI looks at it?
Well, those are great points. Let's unpack. I think you've kind of hit on a few issues there. Let's unpack them. Let's come back to your first point about an image, for one thing, being used to diagnose a totally unrelated condition. We're seeing this in not only, and again, another imaging profession. Think about ophthalmology or what they call oculomics now.
Right.
Retinal scan. The eyes are the window to the soul. The eyes are also the window to many different health conditions, cardiometabolic and things. So we're seeing that in terms of these images that can be used for multiple diagnostic purposes or even predictive purposes to say, okay, we think this is happening. Let's go test in blood. Let's do some other follow-ups. Yes, you may have this condition. This scan that was done for something else found this other condition. And that's what you're getting to when you talk to or you listen to healthcare administrators. They're like, I don't want your point solution. I want something that can be scaled. I want something that serves just not the radiology department, but could help in cardiology, could help in diabetes, could help in other areas. And that's what we're now, this kind of first pass, second pass. So that's interesting. And then you also mentioned issues about access to care, whether it's, and I hate the private versus public, employer versus socialized, because at the end of the day, almost every system, save for North Korea and Cuba, maybe, or Albania, we
Right.
have a mix of public and private payers, right? In
Right.
Canada, it's the public dollar that's usually the primary dollar. In the United States, it's employer or private, but you also have public systems too for people who are elderly, people who are low income. So, but what is interesting in that dynamic is in both countries and in different places in Europe and other places around the world, especially lower and middle income countries, we have shortages of primary care physicians and nurses and radiologists and oncologists globally. But if you can use some of the technology and use some of these radiology scans that are really good, in X-rays and imaging, in with great Wi-Fi, 6G, LTE, you can do that in these underserviced areas and teach a tech or a nurse practitioner or an RN on locum or something like that to run the first scan, send it back to the metropolitan area or the larger urban center to help in the diagnosis with a preliminary result from an AI algorithm or scanning software. This is a way to bring more healthcare to people. And if you think about countries, I've just been reading a lot of stuff about India and places in sub-Saharan Africa. If you can, they're building the GPS, the satellite technology, and the transmission technology. If you can layer on some of the AI and healthcare solutions, healthcare can be provided to people who have never had access to a primary care physician. This is health for all. This is good news.
Yeah. Actually, I think that leads nicely into your next topic about sovereign AI, if you want to discuss that now.
Oh, now we're getting into geopolitics. And I said we weren't going to talk trade and tariffs. But, well, sovereign AI, very quickly put, again, this is getting into one of the technical terms, if you want to call it that, or a political term, is basically countries are understanding that AI is in their national interest. AI infrastructure, data center, secure cloud storage, secure generation of solar, wind, electrical power to power data centers is important not only for their national economic interests, it's a function of national defense as well. So you have the United States, President Trump just a week ago revised and updated the Biden administration plan with an action plan for AI in the United States. China has its own ambitious, India has it, the UK has it, France has it, the EU has it, Korea, Canada. And obviously, Kai-Fu Lee, a gentleman who's written a few books, wrote AI Superpowers back in 2018, talking about the race in AI between the United States and China. But there are many other players in that world, including Saudi Arabia, including the UAE. They're dropping hundreds of billions of dollars into, and if they can't make the talent, they're buying it, they're recruiting it. The United States is still the leader in the context of NVIDIA, Tesla, Microsoft, Google, Meta, in terms of the big system players that make chips, drive the technology, have the IP, but other countries are keeping up. And for our specific conversation about AI and healthcare, the biggest opportunity to have a healthy population, to have a healthy economy, a prosperous economy, is you need a healthy population. Right. And we have a variety of chronic conditions, the four horsemen of the chronic disease apocalypse, cardiometabolic conditions, diabetes, other issues in that area. You've got cancer, you've got heart disease, you've got dementia. And these things, we need to keep people living longer. AI can help. And most countries that have sovereign AI strategies have carved out a specific healthcare component. And the one that comes to mind is the UK. The Labour government under Keir Starmer, a month or so ago, came out with their new 10-year plan for the National Health Service. And it's digital first. Every patient has an EHR that is on their app in a decade. AI first diagnosis, digital first diagnosis, looking for chat bots as your entry in and out and navigating, and different tools to navigate the healthcare system. That's fascinating in terms of how people want to look at the technology for aging populations that are getting sicker as well over time. And that's part of their sovereign AI framework. That's what I think you'll see more of, and it'll drive health decisions. And so we have bottom up pushing by consumers and clinicians, and top down in terms of public policy. It's a fascinating mix in time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I covered a story recently for Cure, which is an accelerator in New York, about recent changes for Fed rules regarding Medicare. And they're really pushing to basically open up their data vaults to people who want to develop apps to help people with chronic conditions, right? To help reduce costs. So how do you help people that are elderly with dementia, better connect with caregivers or hospitals, depending on what their daily needs are like, or someone with diabetes track how they're living and what they're eating, and so they can get better care. So that's an interesting with the federal government, kind of coming in, and then there's a push from consumers as well for these things.
Well, and just on the federal government side, I was reading this morning. You say keeping up, like I don't know when to read, when to relax. It's like eat, sleep, shower, AI, repeat. Like it's a cycle. Right. And I need an AI to keep up with the AI that's keeping up with my AI. It's that bad. But I saw that the FDA came out with some digital health guidelines for pharmaceutical manufacturers and providers. And to your point on the second side around your sleep score, your blood sugar levels, if you live with diabetes type 1 and or type 2, and other conditions you have, many of us are wearing some sort of smartwatch. We've got
Yeah.
stuff on our phone or a ring. And some of the data, and we're seeing a harmonization between medically specific devices that have medical grade information and consumer devices that some of them are being built in to eventually get FDA designations for other things. And I say FDA because, again, that's the gold standard, and often then Europe will follow, or Canada will follow, or other companies will follow, because in terms of their medical devices, they all have kind of the same classification. They're called different things of what's consumer, what's a surgical device that needs much more stringency. But all of that is coming for you and I wanting to have more sovereignty over our own health data, our own control, and makes us better patients. And we're all trying to live well, live longer. And every trip around the sun, you're like, how many steps do I have? And did I get good sleep? I mean, and some of the stuff can be uploaded, I think, eventually. Some health systems do it now. But the question is, we're going to be generating so much data. Can the health system receive it? And how do you make sense of it all? What does it mean? And how do you marry that, your sleep patterns for the last week, with your cough patterns, with your prescription volumes, with some lab work that did some blood results or urinalysis, or you had, heaven forbid, you're not there yet, but I am, colonoscopies and endoscopies. And the only good thing about a colonoscopy is the farting room after. That's all I'll tell you. But that's the kind of place, again, for consumers who want to remain consumers and not necessarily be patients in care. This can be very helpful and very empowering and help you stay out of a hospital or stay out of a clinic.
Yeah, and I think that divide's really interesting. I'm actually working I'm advising a company now that's developing a system to help integrate real world data from devices, electronic health records for clinical trials from drug developers. Because again, so much of that information is missing. And then when the drug gets to the public, there's things that you don't see. So that's one potential thing, that we can see more of.
And you see that, especially in clinical trials. My background in the pharmaceutical world, you're seeing that in what they're calling decentralized or more remote clinical trials, where they are asking patients, especially in places like rarer diseases or ultra rare diseases where clinical trials are hard to do, or subtypes of cancer, and you may be a drug on the market already, but you're trying to find a new indication for a new tumor type. But there's only so many people, a smaller clinical trial, because you have some baseline data, but recruiting those patients, you may not get them all from New York, Toronto, Chicago, London, Hong Kong, whatever the case may be. They may be in some small town in Mississippi or somewhere else. Well, they can't get to that big city all the time for their quarterly medical or their weekly kind of check-in on what the results are. But a medical device, or if some of that, what they call PROMs, reported outcomes and monitoring, that can go into the system. And that's where, to your point, where some of the wearables and some of these other devices, some of these other measurements can go into an EHR, can become part of the clinical trial data evidence, and basically see if the drug is working or not, and can be submitted for approval.
A couple of things that I find funny about this. A couple of years ago, I was talking to a surgeon friend of mine about how amazing it is that we have these devices that track all my movements and my heart rate and everything else. And I'm like, wouldn't it be helpful for you as a doctor if I'm your patient, to see how I'm doing? He's like, I don't care about any of that. He's like, I only want to know about, like, if you come in, high blood pressure rate, if you have a fever, and I think sometimes we get excited because it's like, wow, this data could be helpful. And then some people go, you know what? It actually doesn't mean anything. It's too much.
It's noise.
Yeah.
Well,
noise. Right.
But it's noise, but you can get algorithms and other things that would look at that and say, yeah, noise, your sleep, your heart rate variability on my Garmin watch when I sleep. I don't know what the heck that is. Right?
Right.
I don't know. It says I'm between 28 and 32 and it's good. Okay, great. But if you see this over time, but some watches contract signals for AFib, your doctor probably wants to know about that. So if there are things that can go into the system and the data can get there, and when there is an outlying event or something that's a real outlier, something cause for concern, can that push into your EHR? Can that push a note and a nudge to your primary healthcare team, whether that be the nurse practitioner or admin person, whoever the case, or your pharmacist, or your specialist? If that data is relevant, then it can be helpful. But I get the point of, like, too much noise. I need to see you. I need to understand, and that's why we have certain vitals that get checked all the time.
Right. And I think, there is that the genius of AI or the benefit of is having the signal and the noise, right? So we were talking a little bit off camera about this before, but the pharmacovigilance, right? It's a huge issue. Hospitals have been trying to cut down on it, but like the survey came out recently saying 80% of doctors or healthcare leaders don't feel like they're doing enough. And they just can't. They have teams that monitor it. Well, now they're using AI systems that can find these subtle patterns that, if you were looking at a spreadsheet, you might not notice that some employees are, say, taking things out of the cabinet at a certain time at night, right? But AI can look at massive amounts of data and find these potentially troubling signals that could lead to identification. Similar with, AFib or other wearable
Yeah.
devices. Your doctor probably doesn't need to know everything when you get the middle of the night to
Oh,
go pee how many times. But if there's like, either a breakout of something or, other signals that might be more subtle, but they can see a broader pattern, that's where it could benefit.
well, two examples there. One, I worked in the opioids and controlled drugs and substances space for 5 years. Public policy, reimbursement, dealing with the addiction community, dealing with outreach, street outreach workers, dealing with government on risk management plans and pharmacovigilance, the surveillance. Diversion, in facility diversion, was a big issue for a lot of healthcare institutions in terms of because you would have opioids in a pharmacy, a hospital pharmacy, you could have them in a psych ward, you could have them in an ICU for pain management. The diversion is there, AI can monitor, and if we marry that with the Internet of Medical Things, where the cupboard is being opened and closed, or somebody needs to scan a card, or a retinal scan, or a fingerprint scan. And at the same time, you talked about the person who you're in the ICU or you're post-op, you're recovering from surgery, you're able to get up and walk around, but you're going to the bathroom 4 times in one night. Well, a sensor could monitor that.
Yeah.
Could go to the nurse's station. That's interesting. When they will check in the morning, you okay? Is there something going on? Do we have another infection that we haven't caught? So all those sorts of things. Again, the noise versus the signal. If we get the calibration right, it can be helpful. But your original point on a doctor said, I don't want to know all that. It's too much. I get that too. So there is a balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe sort of is connected is the increased use of AI for medical advice and among
Yes.
patients. And this is one I'm really fascinated about. I wrote a story for Wired magazine about this recently, and every day on Twitter or X, I'm not calling it X, but on Twitter, I see people posting about I had this issue. I asked ChatGPT or whatever, and it gave me this great solution. And so there was one story that went viral early this year. It was a boxer, retired boxer, had a clicking jaw every time he opened his mouth. And he had like 8 different scans, MRIs, tests. No one could come up with anything. And he asked ChatGPT, it said, put your tongue here in your mouth and press here. And he's like, within 10 seconds, it was gone. 5 years of like no answers. So, but on the flip side, there are people getting bad advice too. And what the studies have shown is that what's really critical is that the information you give to it. So there was one study out of the UK, I believe, where they gave people, here's a set of things you're feeling, headache, pain in your neck, and ask ChatGPT to just give you an answer or different models. And some people got the correct answer saying, hey, it's meningitis, go to the hospital now. And some were just saying, just go lay down in a dark room and but the answers weren't wrong based on what information they were given, but they were incorrect because it misdiagnosed something because you weren't being, so that's the error in that situation is human, but that is where the danger lies, right?
It is, and it's ironic in terms of let's kind of again. So what we're seeing here is years ago there used to be Reader's Digest had things that they could talk about. If you had these symptoms, they would walk through. If you had these things, you could probably have this. It was a Reader's Digest series, and then we got to ask the doctor. In the early days of the internet, there were some small sites that were like kind of mini chatbots. And then we got to Dr. Google. Everybody did Dr.
Yeah.
Google. And to your point, depending on how you ask the question, it was you probably have an infection, you should sleep, you should hydrate, or it's a brain tumor.
Right.
That was the range, right? And we're seeing the same thing now in ChatGPT, Claude, any LLM that's out there. That what I would call a foundation model. It's been built on text from all over the world. It's had as much time training on medical things as it did on the works of Shakespeare, right? So, and you'll ask the question, and if you ask the question with a bias, don't you think that Don't you think that all these countries have been evil countries throughout their history, Russia time? Well, if you bias the question, sometimes you get the biased answer that because it's again, we have to remember these are prediction machines. You're asking and it's predicting. But the more you iterate, the more you go down. Hopefully you get to a better answer. Like a doctor does to a degree in terms of asking questions, tell me about your symptoms here, there. I mean, that's kind of their training in terms of getting to what they think it is, some of the tests they'll run to rule out things and get to a diagnosis, order some labs or look down your throat, whatever the case may be. So, but the other thing is there's a range of also symptom checkers that are out there that you can go find online on the Google App Store, the Android App Store, or on your software if you want to look at it if you're on a desktop. Again, buyer beware. And none of these is still as good as a medical professional, whether it's your telehealth line, getting to a community clinic, trying to get into a doctor, or if you have one. Where I live in Canada, 6.5 million people out of 41 million are still waiting to get to see a doctor. We can't get one.
Yeah.
So you're into community care, urgent care, or you end up at the ER, which is the worst place to be unless you're really sick. So
Right.
Dr. Chat GPT is a real issue. Interesting to see where it goes as these new models get better and better and better.
Well, just a viral story this week, just to talk about like, the bias data issue was a patient or somebody who basically he read somewhere that table salt was bad for you. He wanted to eliminate all salt in his diet.
Yes.
And so it gave him a diet of like bromide and he had bromide poisoning. We haven't seen that kind of thing,
Yeah.
sickness like in 100 years. So, the misinformation is everywhere. And again, if you ask it for something, it will give you an answer that's correct for what you're giving it, but it might not be healthy for you. So that's,
It
you
it
know,
can't be, but I don't want to blame. We should never blame patients or people. So how could you believe that? Somebody's in pain. Somebody we don't know what levels of education or access, or people may be new to a country that don't have access. Very not confident in communicating their systems and being able to tell somebody your symptoms in the language of your choice, even if you're an immigrant, is really important in certain hospital settings. So that's people are desperate if they're looking for information. There are other things we need to try and address as a society there in terms of getting better access to primary care.
I personally think it's a big upgrade over Dr. Google because, like you said, you have a symptom, you Google it, and there's always like a worst case brain tumor, you're gonna die in 5 minutes, kind of, and it's scary for anybody reading that online. Like, well, is it true or not? I feel like at least ChatGPT is going to give you a more accurate assessment or a more accurate answer initially that you check in with your doctor for versus going down the Reddit rabbit hole about, oh, I had this one thing I ignored and now all of a sudden I'm losing my arm or something.
So what's really interesting about ChatGPT is that people can go in and put more symptoms in and put more information in the first prompt, and that may get you, or Claude or Gemini and these other tools, and get you to a more complete assessment. I don't want to call it a diagnosis, but assessment of an idea of things that may be happening to you. But I agree, it is a lot better than the old Dr. Google. First of all, you're not fighting 3 ads and up there to go
Right.
to Voyage in Punta Cana or kind of here's your miracle kind of supplement that'll cure everything
Yeah.
except the plague. So it is getting better.
I saw a conversation on Reddit went viral on Twitter. It was this anti-vax group debating, this woman's son was bit by a bat, and she's like, the doctor wants to give him a rabies shot, but I'm like, anti-pharma, anti-vaccines. What do I do? And people are like, I wouldn't mess around. Like, I don't take any shots, but I would not mess around with rabies. It's 100% death if you get it. Like,
Well, here's my favorite hashtag: vaccines cause adults.
right. And again, this is the broader thing that I'm seeing. Look at Twitter. People will now get in these political debates and they'll ask Grok, and Grok will give truthful answers. And you're seeing a lot of people they have a cognitive dissonance because they're being told the truth about either politics, but same thing for healthcare. I think, people fall down these rabbit holes where they want to believe that something is not true because they're anti, pharma, anti healthcare organizations, and so they go down these pathways. So hopefully, if they actually trust ChatGPT or AI to be more, to give an honest answer without kind of like a personal view on it or a money making view, hopefully it might offset some of this anti-information.
I hope so. Two things. One, I'm going to report you to Elon Musk for using the banned word that starts the platform that formerly was known as Twitter. You're going to be in trouble there. you're gonna be shadowed down your account.
Oh,
You're
yeah, I'm
done
probably
for a
already
week.
am. So
Uh, and yeah, and trust and the science. I mean, there's let's not get it. That could be a discussion for another day. The war on
yeah,
science
yeah,
and
definitely.
as I but people who are anti-vaccination, they've already vaccinated themselves against a lot of scientific truth. So you know where I stand.
Well, and one more take on this, just real quickly. So I also cover this in my article a little bit, my Dr. ChatGPT article, with physicians, for instance. So there's a study that came out 2 years ago. They gave physicians three groups. One just, reviewed patient cases and came up with their diagnosis and reasoning. One group used their own reasoning and then reviewed a ChatGPT version, and then just the ChatGPT version alone. And the ChatGPT version alone got 100% or 95% accurate, or correct assessment, and the doctor alone got like 74%. The doctor and ChatGPT group only got 76% better, so it didn't really
Yeah,
help them, and but surprisingly, so that just shows that doctors, when AI was giving them answers they didn't agree with, they didn't accept it. But another thing came out like this past month where um, medical students using ChatGPT were more likely to basically dismiss their own point of view when it was
yes,
wrong. So, I
it's
wonder
it's
about, like with flying, right? With autopilot, are our pilots less able to navigate like a Sully situation where something goes wrong that's
well,
a 1 in 1,000 chance? What's the future of medicine gonna be like?
two things there. One, we can look to other industries where we've had automation, right? And there's a slippery slope between, or an evolution between automation and rules and algorithms versus intelligence or having decisions being made for you based on the body data. And can you always go off the autopilot and make a decision? So that's an interesting area. But here's another thing that I didn't want to raise, but it talks to me about where Chat GPT is going, some of these other things. I read an article and I wrote about it on my X feed. It's called X, not Twitter. I'm just bugging you, right? We're having fun. Hopefully, you
This
can
is
get
why
me
we have
back
a
in the
trade
next one.
barrier,
Yeah. Oh,
you're
yeah.
poking the bear, the eagle.
Thanks. Yeah, I am. Well, years ago, we just had we don't have Trudeau anymore as our prime minister, but his father, 50 years ago, was also prime minister, said living next to the United States is like being a mouse and sleeping beside the elephant. You can always feel it move. So I get the disparity and the difference. But think about this: in the world of CRISPR and gene editing, there's now a tool called CRISPR GPT, where you can. It's been a Stanford and I think Johns Hopkins and a few others. I may have it wrong, and if I do, I will get it corrected. Where you can literally talk to a GPT like tool, like you and I are talking. I'd like you to make me a protein, or what if I change the gene expression this way? Could I modify that? How would that work? And it goes into a genomic database. And think about the stuff that could be done for rare diseases, rare conditions that 1 in 50 people in the world are born with, that a gene we know, a genetic mutation will present or has an 85% chance. Like that's just some of the stuff that not sci-fi anymore. This isn't Asimov. This isn't Peter F. Hamilton or Ray Bradbury or whoever you like to read in the sci-fi world today. It's here. That's the exciting part that not only researchers can be excited about, but you and I can think about for our own families and our own health.
Well, this is exactly a topic I've been thinking a lot about the past year. So I have three kids. My eldest is my daughter. She's 18. She is nonverbal autistic and she has drug-resistant seizures. So she has a seizure once a week. She's on four medications, been on medications for, a decade now, and she still has them. And so clearly there's something in her body that's causing these issues. And we've done genetic tests, and every year, like they say, or every other year, hey, we did a test again. We didn't find anything new, and she's perfectly fine. And I do wonder, like we having these large databases that are public access now. So Tahoe 100M, there's one by Recursion that came out recently. I think it's
Yeah.
called Bolts 2. These are large models or large data sets that are publicly available to mostly, they're made for drug hunters, biotech companies. But at what point is someone like me, I can't build an app. I'm not a coder, but I can use an agent or a chatbot to help me build an app or an agent. Well, what's stopping me from taking my daughter's genetics? I can download the file from, the company I get her genetics from, send it to a large, make an agent or a large database. Say, hey, can you find anything? You can search, you can do a million experiments in an hour that would take humans a billion years to do. Maybe there's this citizen science angle where people are, even if you don't need to know science, but you can actually just query with natural language, your genetics or other issues you're concerned about and find treatments.
Well, that's some of the stuff that's happening in CRISPR GPT. The technology is not stopping you. It is probably the knowledge to craft a series of queries or prompts, as they're called, to figure out how to get that information and to upload or to grab a set of data from what open source database, what or the UK Biobank, those sorts of things. So it's that's the great thing in terms of people who have curious questions. That, as I like to say, in this world, everything is figure outable. You just need the right curiosity, the right questions, and yes, the right patience, because you may come up with a different genetic technique or a potential medication that still has to undergo scientific validation in terms of trials, side effects, adverse events, and to make sure that, yeah, if we did this, you solve this issue, but you'll kill the patient. Like,
Yeah.
so.
Well, think about SETI. I wonder if this is where we're going in this industry where, SETI uses your downtime, your computer to search through star charts and find potential planets, right? What if, again, citizen scientists build these agents and they're just searching in backgrounds for new drug. They're using public databases that are large and have all this access, and they're searching for stuff. Could we get to a model where everyday people like me and you without maybe a big background are like, hey, I identify here's 10 potential treatments for cancer, sell it to like an early stage biotech or a VC because I'm not going to develop a drug or run a trial, but they can't necessarily look for everything out there. So there could be a new model of drug development right now where it's a bridge between the early stage between academic and professional.
Absolutely. I love the SETI example. And let's just flip it on its head for a second. There are thousands of drugs out there. There are thousands of that are approved that may no longer be used because they're multiple generations old. I just saw one yesterday that an old tuberculosis drug could be applicable for early stage Parkinson's, because we can also use the same computing power, and we haven't even gotten into quantum computing. That's got to
Right.
be our next podcast because we've got to do another one.
Yeah.
But how you use big data and big science. Remember, what AI needs is two things. It needs a lot of data and it needs a lot of compute. It finds patterns, it makes predictions, it finds inferences. And we can get into about deep learning, algorithms, deep learning, convolutional neural networks. Or maybe we should never get there, just that people know you can do these sorts of things.
Right.
But you can go, a company called Every Cure by a doctor who had his own disease. And he said, I'm not going to die of this thing. And he went and found an old medication or a stranded pharma asset to help him with this rare disease. And that's the other place in terms of, it's just not finding new cures. It's taking the medicines that are already approved, that have been through some clinical trials, but didn't work in one area, one condition, using the data, look at the symptoms, look at genetic markers, biomarkers, may work for another disease. That could be something in autism too, or the various types of autism.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I always kind of laugh when I see tech companies go, "Oh, we're going to cure cancer in 5 years." They're not trying hard enough in science, and it's like, no, it's really effing hard to do. There's a reason why we don't have a universal cure for cancer or a universal flu vaccine, right?
Well, for
Um,
sure. And,
but
and computational biology is hard. You can put a whole bunch of computing power, but the biology is still hard. I love when people say, we could go to the moon, but we can't cure one of 232 different types of cancer. One is engineering and physics. The other is the bio. We have 100 trillion cells in this little body of ours. Good
yeah,
Lord.
it's
It's
like a,
not
a
easy.
lock with a billion different combinations, and you can't physically do all the combinations to find. And like a good example is Huntington's, right? It's
Yeah.
Huntington's. It was a single gene delivered condition. We've known about it since the 80s, and we still don't have a treatment for it. We haven't been able to figure out how to correctly hit it or change that condition.
Well, there was a story out this week as well. I posted about it. There's a drug that was finally brought out from a biotech, and I think AstraZeneca had the last rights to it. I'm not promoting one company or another. But this drug is the first treatment for a condition that was identified, a very rare condition, 200 years ago. Surely, in this day and age, we don't have to have patients or generations of patients live with a disease and die. We can do better, and I think that is the promise of where we are.
Well, and then maybe my last topic is sort of kind of building off this. Beyond discovery is the issue of funding. We're in a really bad environment for companies trying to raise money right now. It's just not happening. And there's been very few IPOs. I think there was a report out. I covered this for Cure was that For the first time in 15 years, there's no IPO in the second quarter of this year. I don't know if it's the first time in the second quarter, first time for any quarter not having an IPO, but no biotech IPOs, 15 years. And then money's been down, but what we are seeing is a lot of money. The money that's out there is going towards AI native companies or companies using AI, and in particular, ambient scribes. You and I have talked about this. This is like the hottest thing people are investing in. There've been a lot of companies. One raised 2 rounds, I think, and within like 4 months, they have a $500 million. But there's bigger news from the big players pushing back. So, do you want to give this topic a go?
For sure. And the IPO thing, let me kind of give the flip side of that coin, or the other side, two sides of the same coin. In the biotech space, no IPOs in the second quarter, as you pointed out, or big IPOs. In the big pharma space, and sometimes like companies like Amgen or Roche, where does Genentech end and Roche begin? I'm not sure. The big cancer, one of the world's biggest cancer companies. We've also seen a lot of turnover of the CEOs in the last 5 years. So that industry, the drug discovery, drug development industry, is trying to integrate AI across its platform of operations. It's having a challenge, and the demands for it. And we saw it because of COVID. People aren't going to wait. Like we had Operation Warp Speed. Kudos to the Trump administration and other companies that were there.
Yeah.
Like I mean, you sequenced a virus and had workable vaccines in less than a year. That has not been done in science, but that's the expectation now. So people want that. But to your point, yeah, the money's been flowing to if there is into health tech or med tech, it's going to AI or AI native companies. And you talked about, let's just level set ambient AI and AI scribe. Ambient AI is basically AI that records as you talk to your doctor in the office or a primary care provider or a bunch of healthcare professionals having a discussion in an operating theater or a surgical theater. And what it can do is put billing codes into your insurer, those sorts of things, can categorize those notes for an AI scribe, can take those notes and put them nicely in a doctor's chart and make you a nice prescription. So the pharmacist, I mean, never has to read that chicken scroll again
Right.
that I used to do when I TA'd people's university papers. So that had a big business. There was a bunch of companies like Heidi Health, Nuance, Scribe Health,
Ambience health. Yeah.
ambient scribe companies. Well, the two biggest EHR providers in the United States, if not the planet, the biggest one is Epic, which has anywhere between 42 and 40% of all EHRs installed across the health system in the United States. And then there's also Oracle. They bought Cerner, but they also have their own Oracle Health Record. Both of these two companies this past week came out basically saying, we're going to have our own ambient AI and AI scribes put into our systems. Well, the valuations and the future of these companies that built software to go into these EHR platforms, they're in doubt. Where do they go? Where do they pivot, so to speak? So that's the big issue here, but it's not new. We've seen this before, and I was commenting on some boards, and people are like, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I do know a similar lesson from history. Recall back when we had 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 web browsers, Yahoo, AOL, everybody who had a dial-up connection had a web browser. They gave way to Netscape and Mozilla and Microsoft Explorer. And then Google and Firefox became the dominant brands and really ruled the roost for a long time because they aggregated and kind of bought up those companies or bought up their technology, their search technology. Same thing in your Microsoft operating environment. Or if you're an Apple, let's use Apple, the iOS ecosystem. Think about all the things that come on your, or even on your Android phone today, all the things that come preloaded. You got a flashlight, you've got weather, you've got calculator. Sometimes you have you've on the calculator you've got currency valuations in 15 different 20 different currencies. You've got language, you've got a calendar, you've got a contacts thing. Those things in the original ecosystems of the iPhone and the Android, this Galaxy device, the Samsung, they were part of the neighborhood. They were your neighbors. They weren't your, now they're your front living room. They're part of your house. So that's the same thing I think we're seeing here in this world of consolidation. And that's the level we're at here in AI with a lot of companies out there. It reminds me of the dot-com bust in 2000. Everybody said, I'm pre-IPO. They didn't have an IP. They didn't have anything. They were just kind of running along. You have some people have interesting algorithms or small apps, but they're never going to be something that's used in every doctor's office in 12 states or 15 countries. So we're starting to see that consolidation and that integration of a broader service offering. Coming back to what I talked about at the beginning of our conversation, administrators, healthcare administrators, insurance companies, governments, the people who are paying for the systems, paying for the care, paying for the transactions, give me something that works at scale. I don't want 25 different pieces of software doing billing. I want one. I don't need 60 different imaging systems in my radiology department. I need one. I need two.
Yeah.
I
And
think that's what we're getting to.
I saw somebody post on the site formerly known as Twitter, saying that I
You're getting better.
it was a company. They were building an AI scribe for a client, and it basically the product was perfect. It worked well. It was a lot cheaper than the big box ones, and they would no one doctors weren't using it, even though and this was the issue. Like they're comfortable with the system they already have, even though they don't. Everyone wants to complain about Epic, but the problem is it's already integrated into their system. So even though the new tool might be better and faster and quicker, no one wants to learn to do the new tool, and it's hard to integrate sometimes. So you know that's the challenge.
And you have you've seen this in some of where the money is in some of the big metropolitan health systems and hospitals. So they have the money to go out and get a custom made solution as opposed to an off the shelf or out of the box and tweak it a bit. But then the question we come back to the big word in healthcare for everybody: interoperability. Can I move the data from your institution to this insurer? Is it HIPAA compliant? Is it FIHR 7, which just is a protocol to make sure stuff can move and people can read it? Think about it. It's kind of like everybody has different types of spreadsheets, but can I export it as a comma delimited file and then use it in my database or use it in my application or drop it into my table, whatever the case may be? So that's the area of where you want to be able to move data between you and your doctor's office and your hospital, your regional hospital, and you need to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, or in Florida, or you need to go to Dana-Farber because you've got a very rare cancer, or MD Anderson, or you need to go to Stanford Med in your neck of the woods. Does the data move with you, right? So sometimes, can the systems talk together? And we have the technology. AI can help you do that to make different data points talk together, regardless of the system, be system agnostic, so to speak. But at some point in time, there will be a consolidation. I mean, it's no accident that your USB-A and your USB-C are your USB standards across the planet. It's no accident that you've got your kind of your mouse, your optical mouse kind of works the same way from a Mac PC to a Google PC to a basic Intel-based or so-called Windows PC. I mean, we get to certain levels of standardization that make the world go round.
Yeah, there are a couple of points on that. So the HHS, Health and Human Services, announced recently a push towards getting interoperability standards for AI, so that there's no more closed networks that Epic can dominate. But at the same time, one of the downsides I think of Obamacare, as much as it's helped, is that it really pushed towards consolidation of healthcare providers. So a lot of formerly private doctors' practices and different family offices have been absorbed by or acquired by hospitals. And so when you have a market where you have more dominant players versus a lot of smaller players, the smaller players might go for price over a big player like Epic, right? They want the cheap AI scribe. But if all the providers are healthcare providers are now part of a bigger organization, those bigger organizations, they're always going to go for like the Microsoft or the Epic because they get price reductions, they get all their services under one roof. So I do wonder if it might kind of strangle some of the newer upstarts who are trying to win that market.
It could be, but the Epics and the Microsofts, they're in this Microsoft with Nuance as kind of their AI scribe, and Azure and Teams. They're saying, but I also have this product that I can incrementally price something there because you already have an installed base with me on a whole bunch of other software applications.
Yeah.
So I mean it's like in the insurance industry, they used to call it tide selling. We'll do your mortgage, we'll do your car, but we also got some kind of property and casualty insurance over here for your business. Since you're already doing this, we'll give you a deal. So I mean, these are the dynamics of those kind of commercial relationships.
Well, we've had a great conversation today. I'm sure we could go on for hours, but I do want to not hit the limits again. So on our time, why don't you give me some of your maybe a couple ideas, things you're paying attention to right now that you think will be big stories for the rest of the year or even next year?
I think agentic AI, we put it in the background. It was supposed to be the big tool of the year. And a lot of companies, Jensen Wang from NVIDIA has talked about it, Sundar Pichai from Google, Satya Nadella from Microsoft. They've all talked about the companies that have a new job where I will be managing 1,000 or
Agents.
1,000,000 agents that are
Yeah.
doing different things. They work well in rules-based systems in terms of back office stuff, revenue cycle management, as they call it in the healthcare space. I've tried, I'm sure you've tried to use off the shelf tools, Zapier, if this, then that, Manus AI,
Make.com.
to
Yeah.
do my own kind of web scraping or get me the top 5 posts on X every day from in this area and these hashtags. They kind of work, they kind of don't, but they're coming around. I think agentic AI is going to kind of come into its own later this year and into 2026. The other thing that I'm really watching here is people I'm just seeing in the last month, and I've talked about it for a few years. People are all of a sudden starting to talk about the things that we've been talking about as well. Maybe the EHR is a living thing. It's not a static thing. It lives with us in terms of the data. Are there companies that are trying to do that? And how does that work in our own health? And I think the Dr. Chat GPT that you spoke about is going to evolve in terms of, because more and more people are coming to their doctor to say, I was on Chat GPT this morning here, Dr. Flinn, and these 3 symptoms, I don't think my medications are right. So I think, and I don't mind that empowerment, those questions, but I think changing the nature of the provider patient relationship, AI is going to do a lot of that combined with wearables. That's the stuff I want to see. And to your point, there may be healthcare professionals who are like, time out, time
Right.
out. So there is a power dynamic. That's interesting. And then where are the professions going? Where the layers of adoption go? We're moving beyond these point solutions to things that are changing clinical workflows, not fitting with the clinical workflow, or changing how a medical profession conducts itself. And some of the discussions that leaders and the associations, the regulatory colleges have about those changes and how they work with AI. I mean, by 2028, there are 2 types of healthcare professions: people who practice AI and healthcare professionals who used to have a practice and now don't. So I'm trying to see that in terms of frontline healthcare professionals, how they're dealing and incorporating the technology to care for us and how we react to them.
Yeah, you really hit a bunch of things that I also been feeling strongly, and talking in particular, there's this natural distrust a lot of times of doctors and big pharma. And I think part of it is, typically when you go to the doctor, you have 5 minutes with them and they're not even making eye contact. They're just typing, they're taking notes, right? They're doing the electronic health records. So, and that's why if you look at when people have done studies about people that get like acupuncture or chiropractor work done, those can be seen as pseudoscience, but they feel better because if you ever done those visits, they spend 30 minutes looking at you and talking. How do you feel?
They
What's
have a
going on in your
conversation
life?
with you.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's the element that I think ambient AI scribes could actually do. So people start actually, interacting with the doctors, and the doctors they're getting burnt out because they hate doing all this data entry, right? That's not what they were went to med school for. So if it changes the relationship between patient and doctor, it can lead to more trust, and then also, maybe more willing to engage with what you saw on ChatGPT versus, oh, just dismissing Google found something that sounds ridiculous, right? So I think that could be a big issue, a big help for people looking at healthcare.
AI can make healthcare more human again. That
Right.
seems to be the promise that everybody agrees on, and that we need to have trust in our physicians, trust in our healthcare providers, and trust in the information that they are using and the tools that they are using. And I always say, don't remember AI. Oh, AI. I said the original med tech was a stethoscope, right? And your blood work and your urinalysis and your diagnostic procedures. If you don't think AI is being used to examine some of those results and screen some of those results and algorithms to rule in and rule stuff out, you haven't been around for the last 50 years because it is being used.
Yeah. Well, again, this has been a great conversation, and I'm sure we can have another conversation in a few months, and there'll be a completely different topic or a number of items. But any kind of closing thoughts?
I just want our 2 countries to get along
Yeah.
in terms of lots of fun that way. But more importantly, I'm just encouraging people to if they've been encouraged by this conversation, go do some research, go do some read, check ChatGPT, check Claude, check Google. There's a ton of great books. And the great thing is, people are watching us right now on their phone, on their laptop, on some device. There are more courses about learning AI, how to prompt, how to use ChatGPT better. There are 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute courses. Go on YouTube right now, do a search. You will, if you did them from now until you took your last dying breath in 80 years, you still couldn't have done all these courses. A lot of great information out there. See what teacher, what format, how much time works for you. Go learn more about it. Don't be afraid of it. Every swipe on this screen, from Netflix to your lottery numbers to predictive texting to your kids or your loved ones, AI is helping you. You're already in control of it. Just be the more the master of your domain.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's so many free examples, like videos from what a 5-minute video to a 2-hour lecture. And these tools are, there's a lot of free layers. You can use them. And I just think experiment with it, try to build an agent on your own, try to use ChatGPT for basic things. And
Yes.
it's amazing what you can do when you actually play with it. It was great talking to you, Walter, and we'll be catching up hopefully in a few months from now.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care. And thanks everybody for watching.
Right.